Welcome to another conversation on the All About You podcast. And today I have a returning guest, Craig, and we are going to be talking about his trip to Venezuela. So Craig, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you very much, Sheila. Thank you for asking me back. It's a pleasure to be here.
Now, I was thinking, is this your second or third visit to the podcast?
It's actually my third, and I'm wondering which return visit gets me a free T-shirt of All About You. Is it 10 visits I get a free T-shirt?
Well, I think I'll have to talk to the powers that be on that one, and I'll come back to you.
Okay.
So, Craig, Venezuela. So my first question is, why Venezuela?
Why did we go to Venezuela? Well, that's a good question. And actually, Sheila, I was asking myself that when I was laying on the floor in the jungle with a gun to my head. But maybe I'll tell you more about that later.
Oh my God, that wasn't the answer I was expecting.
Probably not. No.
Okay, well, we're obviously going to talk about that in a bit. Venezuela, was it something that's been on your bucket list? Did you win a trip to Venezuela?
Well, we love travelling. My wife and I go quite often. We did before the pandemic, and we've started travelling again now. We like to go to different places, see as much of the world as possible, and we've both been really keen travellers for years. And Venezuela is a country that I've always wanted to visit, so obviously Venezuela was on our bucket list, and we planned a trip. My wife usually does the planning, and we wanted to see as much of the country as possible in 3 or 4 weeks.
So you spent a bit of time then sitting down with the internet, working out what you wanted to see, how you were going to get there?
My wife did, and then every so often she'd say, "Craig, is this okay?" I'd say, "Yes, let's do it." She investigated the good tourist places to go to in Venezuela. She planned the route, and we knew from the beginning that it wasn't a good idea to spend a lot of time in the capital, Caracas, because it did have a reputation, I think still does, for some kidnappings, violent crime, street crime. And we went in 2006. So the idea was to arrive in Caracas, in the capital, and then immediately get a flight, an internal flight, out to Mérida, which is a small place in the mountains.
And did that actually go to plan?
Oh yes, the first part of the trip went really, really well. We went to Mérida, we did some trekking, then we went on to the Angel Falls and took a riverboat trip and climbed up to the top of the falls. We went to Canaima, we went to Maracaibo and a beautiful place called Coro. So most of the trip went very, very well. We met some lovely people, had some good food, and did the usual tourist trekking and things that tourists do when they're on holiday.
If we can just backtrack a bit, did you need to get visas? Did you need to get any vaccinations or anything? Is it quite an easy country to gain entry to?
If I remember, we did need a couple of vaccinations, I think for malaria and a couple of other things. Well, malaria tablets and one vaccination. And I think I needed a visa being British, but I don't think my wife did because she's Spanish. So I think that's what happened. But it was a fairly easy trip to organise and actually get to. The problem started towards the end of the trip.
Let's talk about the journey of getting there. So how did you plan? I mean, you've got quite a list of places you visited. Did you go on like an organised bus? Did you take trains? What was the transport to all these places?
We flew a couple of times. Obviously, we flew out to Mérida, first of all, and we took buses. We pretty much went under our own steam. The way that we usually do it is my wife looks at tours in the country from organised tourist companies, and then she plans the trip around the routes that they suggest, but obviously it works out cheaper if you're travelling by yourself. And then you book independent tours depending on where you're going. One interesting thing that happened in Mérida when we got there was that we booked a day excursion out into the countryside with a tour guide and a small group of 7 or 8 tourists. And I don't know if you've been on these day excursions. The first thing that the guide often does is he says, okay, tell us where you're from, which country did you come from, what's your name? So we went round the group and people said, oh, my name's Fred, I'm from the UK, I'm from London, and I'm an architect. And then it came to me and I said, I'm Craig, I'm originally from the UK, but now I live in Valencia, Spain. And the guide said, wait a second, I recognise your voice. Are you from the website Mansion Inglés? I learned a lot of English from the Mansion Inglés. He recognised me just from my voice.
Superstar status!
And it was really, because we were in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the mountains of Venezuela, and this guy recognised me from the audio on our website for people who want to learn Spanish. True story.
I mean, that is amazing.
It was a really, really nice feeling. And I said, yeah, actually, I am. Yeah, I'm the guy who does the speaking on the website.
This is the thing about having a podcast. We're sitting here, just the two of us. You don't know who's listening, where they are, what they're doing. Is there going to be some connection at some point? Yeah, I think that is when the stars start aligning and the magic of podcasting.
You never know who's listening. You really don't.
I think that is a great idea, actually, is to look on the website, see what these tours are saying. Okay, go here, opening it, and then you build your own tour around that. That's a very good idea.
Well, it's got its drawbacks. It sounds good. You definitely save money because you don't have the extra 10 or 15% that the tour operator puts on the price for them. However, it's your responsibility, first of all, to plan everything. And if something goes wrong, there's no one you can phone and say, hey, the driver's not here. What do we do? There's no one you can turn to if things do go wrong because you have planned the trip.
We've talked about, using various forms of transport. Now, your wife is from Spain. She speaks Spanish, so language was not a problem at all. What about you? Were you speaking Spanish all the time?
It was in 2006. I'd already been in Spain for about 9 years, so my Spanish was pretty good, and it was lovely to travel in a country and be able to speak to local people. And because we weren't on a guided tour with a bus and being shepherded around like sheep from one place to another, we did have those moments where we met local people. If we went into a bar or a restaurant and got chatting to people, we could stay there for as long as we wanted. We didn't have to get back on the bus. It was lovely to be able to interact with locals, to chat to people. And for me, it was the first time I'd been to a Spanish-speaking country outside of Spain and being able to travel around and speak to people and converse with them. It was really, really nice.
And did you find it a little bit easier or harder with the South American Spanish to what we call Spanish?
There's definitely adaptation period for me of a couple of days where your ears need to get used to the accent, some slang words, but it's the same language. It's like a British person going to Canada or America, or maybe Ireland or Scotland. The accent can be quite thick, but then very quickly you get used to the sounds of it and you get into how they speak. So not a big problem.
So let's talk about the food. So when you travel, I think one of the most important things is to look forward and try the local food. Any particular foods that you came across that you thought, wow?
I love the arepas. I don't know if you've ever had arepas. It's kind of like an empanadilla, like an empanadilla
is like a mini Cornish pasty, isn't it?
Exactly. Yeah. And they're really, really tasty. All kinds of fillings, so you get fish and meat and vegetarian arepas. They were absolutely gorgeous. Lots of fried food that we quite enjoyed, chicken and those kind of things, but it didn't really vary that much from region to region. And because we were moving around that much, I think we didn't really take advantage of tasting different things and going to fine restaurants. And so we just really had takeaway food quite a lot.
What about this drink you see people with? Is it called yerba? They have like this container and they fill it with water and this sort of, I call it pondweed because I've tried this and it tastes like pondweed. And here in Spain, we see a lot of people from South America carrying around, and it's quite quite a big, it's like a small barrel they carry, and then they've got a cup, which is generally, I mean, they're very ornate and, they look quite stylish, and a metal straw. You know what I'm talking about?
I do know what you're talking about. I think that's more typical of Argentina, and I've seen people drinking it in Chile as well, but we didn't see a lot of that in Venezuela. I think it's called mate.
Oh, is it? Okay.
And it's a mixture of herbs, like you say. Looks a bit like green seaweed, yeah. I haven't tasted it, but yeah, I have seen it. And they have like a silver straw or a metal straw that goes into the pot. And yeah, you top it up with hot water and carry it around with you. Yeah, mate.
Right, okay, so...
We didn't see that.
You didn't see that. So was there anything that you found drink-wise that... what about the coffee? Was the coffee good? Or?
The coffee was good. Venezuelan coffee is very good. And also fruit juices, because they have lots of tropical fruits. So lovely fruit juices as well, especially in the morning.
So what about the coffee? Was it so strong it was going to blow your socks off?
It was similar to Spanish coffee. And again, you have to kind of look for good places. So luckily, my wife's got quite a good nose for smelling good coffee. She'll walk into a bar, have a sniff, and then go, yeah, this smells okay. And she's usually pretty good. So, it's quite strong, Spanish style, and very tasty.
Let's talk about some of the highlights of your trip then.
Well, definitely Angel Falls, because it was kind of an Indiana Jones experience. We were on this boat travelling down a river in a kind of rainforest environment, and then you look up and you see Angel Falls, which is the tallest waterfall in the world, and it's very, very thin and skinny. And Victoria Falls, Niagara Falls, very wide, lots of water gushing down and the noise, but Angel Falls is really, really high, and then we had to climb it. So we climbed up, got off the boat, climbed up, started climbing up, wasn't too bad. Near the top, it started raining. The path on the way up wasn't obviously paved. We were in the middle of the jungle, and everything got really, really muddy. So coming down was like going down a mudslide, and that was difficult. Especially, I've got a bad back, so coming down and twisting around the roots of the trees really gave me quite a lot of back pain. But I'm pleased I did it. It was an experience to climb to the top and climb down again, soaking wet when we got to the bottom.
So on this boat trip then, you knew the plan was to climb up and down this fall?
Yeah, that was in the itinerary. And then we travelled back up the river and back to the hotel.
And what about the age of people on this trip then? I mean, this sounds quite a thing, climbing up the side of these falls. I mean, obviously, you need to make sure that it's the sort of thing, you want to do and you're physically capable of doing. So what was the age group?
Well, mixed. Some parents had their teenage kids with them. Obviously, because we were travelling independently, we didn't travel with the same people. So, for example, this trip, I think there were maybe 8 or 10 people with us, and we hadn't seen them before. Usually very nice people, but all ages. I think we were among the oldest. We tend to be among the oldest. And, most of them middle-aged and a couple of kids.
Okay, so that was Angel Falls then.
So maybe we'll get to the time when we actually had a few problems. Most of the trip was fine. We were having a lovely, lovely time. And then my wife had planned another riverboat trip near the Brazilian border. And the idea was we'd travel by jeep down to a river near the border, and then we would do a river safari for a couple of days, sleeping in villages on the way. And then this was towards the end of the trip, and then we were going to fly to islands called Los Roques, which is a lovely sandy island, couple of days of relaxation, back to Spain. So really towards the end of the trip. We booked the trip, the riverboat trip, met people in a town, and it turns out there was a group of German people coming with us in the jeep, parents and 2 teenage girls from Germany. So we were 6 tourists, the driver of the jeep, the tour guide, and another guy from Venezuela who was going to take us down the river in the boat. So we had about a 3-hour drive from this town out into the jungle down to the river to get the boat. Everything was going fine. We stopped for lunch, and that's important, and I'll tell you why later. We got back in the Jeep after lunch and headed down towards the path that would take us to the river. So going through the jungle on a very remote jungle dirt road, suddenly we saw a tree blocking the path in front of us. And I thought, that's strange. It seems to have fallen exactly perpendicular to the path, and something about that tree got my spidey senses tingling, and I thought, that doesn't look right. And then obviously the driver had to stop. It was a really big tree, and as he stopped, I saw a couple of guys on my left walking towards the car. And I don't know why I did this, Sheila, but immediately I took my money belt from my waist and I tucked it under the seat in front of me. And I don't know to this day why I did that. More guys came and surrounded the Jeep and pulled guns and told us to get out of the Jeep. Obviously, we were really, really scared, and we got out of the Jeep and we were marched into the jungle, away from the Jeep, away from the path, with guns to our head. Every guy, and I think there were about 5 or 6, had a gun, and they pressed it to our head and pushed us towards the tree. Then they told us to take our clothes off. We all stripped naked. The reason for that was to see if we had any hidden money belts or anything on us that they could take. And it's funny what goes through your mind at that time. I was thinking, can I do something? Shall I try and take the gun? Everything was going through my mind at once. Obviously, I was very scared. The poor girls, the teenage German girls, were absolutely petrified because everybody was completely naked. The clothes were on the floor. We laid down on the floor. They took everything. They took the Jeep and they disappeared and left us. We got dressed, walked back to the path, waited for 20 minutes, half an hour, still shaking, and eventually a local van came by, a local truck, and we got in the truck and they took us to the local village where there was a very small police station, and we filed a complaint and explained what had happened. Now, the hijackers, or the carjackers, had taken the Jeep, driven it away really fast, had an accident at some point and hit a tree, panicked, and very, very quickly they'd gone through all of our luggage that we'd obviously left in the Jeep, and they'd taken the valuables. So my wife had her passport stolen, the money that we'd had on us had also gone, or her money had disappeared, her quite expensive camera, and obviously all the possessions of the German people, and they hadn't found my bag that I had around my waist, and I'd put that under the seat, if you remember. That was still there. The police recovered that, and thanks to the police, at least I got my passport back and some money on my credit cards so that we could solve the problem afterwards.
I'm just trying to think about what you just said. My God, I should imagine most people would need therapy after something like that. As you say, the tree across the road perfectly, to me, screamed barrier.
Yeah.
As opposed to a fallen tree.
That's what must have subconsciously, that's what occurred to me, which is hence my reaction to hide my money belt.
I mean, the fact that straight away people came out of the jungle, surrounded you with guns, got you out, marched you away, stripped you. I think that's probably when everybody would lose it, because you just feel so vulnerable, particularly the women.
Yeah. Although, interestingly, my wife had a strange reaction, in my opinion. While I was thinking, okay, the guy's got a gun to my head, is it possible for me to take the gun? What would happen if and I was calculating these things, maybe from a man's perspective, I don't know. As a defense mechanism, my wife was thinking, well, if we put our clothes in the mud, they're going to get dirty. Isn't that interesting?
Thankfully, most of us have never been and never will be in this situation. I should imagine weird and wonderful things go through your brain. I think you automatically went into the I've got to do something here.
And then it's stupid to do anything here. Best to be passive.
And maybe for your wife, she just went to her feminine side.
I think it was more a defence mechanism. I think the realism of the situation made her focus on the small things, not to think about the situation we were in.
Once you grouped and you got yourself together and you went to the police station, it was all the formalities. Yeah. What happened when you walked out that police station?
Well, there was a lot of waiting around. They eventually recovered the Jeep, and I have to say the police behaved wonderfully. They were very kind, obviously very honest, because they actually laid out all the money that I had. I had some dollars and some euros and some local currency and my passport and medical certificates. They laid everything out on the desk, took photographs of it. So luckily we were able to continue and recover from what had happened and get back to Caracas, get back to the capital. You're in shock, Sheila.
I am in shock.
Well, look,
yeah,
when I thought about it after, we travel a lot, and I suppose the law of averages means that at some point something is going to happen. Now, it was very extreme, but if you travel enough, the law of averages says, you're going to get mugged, you're going to have difficulties, there are going to be uncomfortable situations. So that's how I've rationalised it. I've put it down to the fact that we've been to some strange places and travelled. We've been lucky enough to travel around the world, and eventually something's going to happen.
But when you booked this trip with the Jeep, did they give you any indication that don't bring any valuables, etc., etc.?
No, not at all. In fact, my wife Angeles at the time, she was looking when we were in the jungle and they were searching us. She looked at the guide and the driver we had, the Jeep driver, and the guy who was going to take us by boat, to see if they were exchanging any glances with the carjackers, to see if there was any non-verbal communication, to see if they were in on it. And she said she didn't detect anything.
Oh my God! So
she was aware.
She's she's gone into like protection mode to
detective
see if it was a setup. Yeah.
But do you remember at the beginning when we stopped for lunch? We think they were watching us then and followed us and maybe radioed or phoned ahead to block the road. We think because there were 5 or 6 guys, they might have been off-duty military people or police. We don't know, but we think they were watching us when we had lunch. They singled us out as affluent tourists and they planned it by phoning ahead.
Yeah, that is a huge possibility. But I mean, kudos to you taking off your money belt and tucking it underneath.
I don't know
the seat.
what made me do it. I just something made. As soon as I saw people running or walking fast to the car, I thought this doesn't feel right in the middle of the jungle, and I just took it off and stuffed it under. Now, of course, my wife had her passport stolen. We had needed to get to Caracas and go to the Spanish embassy and get her a temporary passport so that we could get home. We were really, really nervous in Caracas. We didn't want to take taxis anywhere. We just had this traumatic experience. We knew Caracas was also very dangerous. And one thing the police did say where it happened in the middle of the jungle was it was the first time they'd ever known of anything like that in the area against tourists. So it wasn't a regular occurrence. It was Caracas that we were nervous about, and it actually happened really far from the capital.
You know, this happened
2006.
Going back though, did it give you nightmares for the first couple of weeks?
No. I think we both got over it quite well. Luckily, we were really, really lucky. It did go through my head, my God, I might not get out of this alive. And it was a momentary thought of, oh, well, it's been a good life. And I did think it could end really, really badly. And then obviously when it doesn't end that way, then you do have this incredible sense of gratitude for it not happening, surviving.
And all the things you're going to do because you've been given a second chance. You're going to run that marathon, and
well, let's not go that far.
Play the piano.
That hasn't happened yet. Let's not say never. But
I mean, that is just Incredible story. If somebody said to you, okay, I'm thinking of going to Venezuela on holiday, would you turn around and go, no, absolutely not, don't do it?
Oh, no. I mean, you can go to New York or London and get mugged.
Yeah.
So it can happen anywhere in the world. We were just unlucky. We were in the wrong place at the wrong time. It could happen anywhere. In fact, this past weekend, we were with friends planning a trip to Ecuador. I would have no problems going to Mexico or even Colombia, because I think sometimes the news blows up dangers in certain hotspots or countries, and when you're actually there traveling, if you've got the information, you know where you're going, then probably you'll be fine. But things can happen. You can get unlucky, but you can get unlucky anywhere in the world.
That is very, very true. So, Craig, we've talked about one of the highlights with Angel Falls, and I don't want to call it a low light because that just doesn't seem to be the right word, but an experience which, thank God, everybody got out and you're all around to tell the tale. What was something that happened that you didn't expect? And we're not going to talk about the jungle thing, but were you impressed? The buildings? Was it the people? What was something you got out the trip that you thought, I really didn't expect that?
It was a long time ago, but one thing that does stand out is that we took a bus, and I think it was from Coro to somewhere else, but I remember going in a local bus down and around mountains, so very narrow roads, one of those roads that twists and turns. And because it was a local bus, it was full of local people, but it was jam-packed full. And I remember it being very hot. The windows were open, and there was so much noise and life in the bus. The bus driver had local music playing. It was very lively. And for like a couple of hours, it was just an amazing experience culturally of being in this bus in the middle of nowhere with people singing and chatting and laughing and joking all around us. And then here we're sitting, two Westerners, two Europeans, in this South American Latin experience, and that was absolutely lovely. So when I look back on holidays, I tend to focus on those experiences, not the bad ones. I focus on the cultural experiences where you're in a situation that you would never be in your home country, and that for me is the beauty of travelling.
I think it's one of those things, isn't it? As much as you plan a trip, sometimes you just fall upon a local fiesta that's happening, or you just happen to walk down a street and there's some local musicians all dancing. So, you know, as much as you've got your itinerary, it's all those things you just turn around the corner and, oh my God, I'd never expected that to be there.
And there was another day as well where we were having lunch in a place near the sea. I don't remember the name of the seaside town. And again, there was music and people were dancing salsa in the middle of the restaurant. It was lunchtime. And that would probably never happen here. It's just a normal day. They were playing music. People had their lunch, and they got up and started dancing in the middle of the day. And it was just lovely. So those moments, stick out.
Did you bring any souvenirs back from your trip?
Apart from the trauma?
Well, apart from the trauma, yeah.
Lots of photographs, and I like taking video, and so we took some video. But, no, I don't remember, because we like to travel light, so we don't tend to have a lot of room in the suitcases or the backpack. So, no, didn't bring anything back.
I mean, I must admit, I'm not an adventurer, but if ever I go somewhere and I'm going to buy a souvenir, it's got to be something practical.
Yeah. Something you use.
That's my rule now. None of this fridge magnet stuff, absolutely not. A bookmark or a great thing I started doing, and I did get this idea from someone else, is to buy some postcards of where you are and just write a little diary of what you did that day. And I used to do that, and that was great, because you think, okay, what have I done? Oh, Monday I went to a local market and I saw somebody cutting up a tuna that had just been caught or something.
That's a really good idea. Buy postcards of where you are and keep them for yourself. Yeah.
Because I think it's just something nice. I mean, now we'd probably take a photograph of the front and the back and keep it in our archive folders. Years and years and years ago, and it's been from the UK, do you remember seeing people arriving back at the airport with these huge donkeys?
Yes.
From Spain?
Sombreros. Yeah.
Oh my God, the amount of stuff they used to bring back.
Yeah. No, I used to do that, but then it gets to a point where there's no more room in the flat. Yeah, we don't tend to bring back souvenirs anymore.
You're talking now about planning another trip.
We're thinking of going to Ecuador and to the Galapagos Islands.
Nice.
For a few days with a group of friends that we met and been travel with over the years. And we was discussing where we're going, what we're doing last weekend. Yeah.
Travel is the greatest education, isn't it?
Yeah, and we really had a hard time not being able to travel during the COVID pandemic. So now that things are opening up, airfares are still quite expensive, unfortunately. Hopefully they'll come down a bit in price. But yeah, we're back on the road, Sheila.
Hopefully you'll be back for another podcast and there'll be no trauma trips on the next one.
Let's hope so.
Oh, thanks very much, Craig, for taking us to Venezuela.
You're welcome. It's been a pleasure.